Let's get. I see a couple of unfamiliar names have popped in, so let's we can continue to hopefully have people file in. But now that we're streaming live, perhaps would this be a moment to sort of reintroduce what we're doing here, or should we wait for a few more folks to pop in, or what do we think? Any opinion?
I think we should give it about another 60 seconds.
Okay, so for anyone who just joined us or anyone who perhaps is catching on to the fact that it's streaming live outside of Zoom, we're just going to wait a minute here in case some folks trickle in before we get going officially with this virtual town hall. All right, and we will be admitting people pretty much readily as they ask to be admitted. So. And of course, all the doctors on this call are more than familiar with admitting privileges. So that's some doctor humor, right, Jansen?
Still got it.
Uh-huh. All righty. Okay. That's weird. Someone joined and then dropped out. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, if it's okay with everyone, I think maybe now's the time to just launch into it, or no?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right. So for anyone who might be watching this anywhere, and for that matter, anyone who might see it as sort of an artifact after we do this live, this is a virtual town hall courtesy of Westchester Youth Congress and Vax Up Westchester in an effort to provide useful, credible, meaningful information around the COVID vaccine, particularly for parents and teens and kids as we approach back to school. And the principal organizer of this was Janice Lynn, with one of these students who was part of the student-run coalition Westchester Youth Congress. And thank you, Janice, for all of your efforts in making this happen.
Thank you, Kenny, for putting it together as well.
No, I'm glad Janice approached us, Vax Up Westchester, of which I'm the executive director, and we've been working around the county and beyond, trying to, meet people essentially in the proverbial, meet people where they are with outreach, engagement, patience, non-judgment, but obviously with the aim of hoping to make people feel comfortable and reassured about getting the vaccine. And then on top of that, offering, actual convenient access to the vaccine. So that's all I want to say about that. And I'll quickly now, we'll go around the horn as I see more people are trickling in to introduce our wonderful panel of selfless, incredibly hardworking medical experts. So why don't we begin with Dr. Mrna Frank, who has been part of the Vax Up Westchester effort and is here with us.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mrna Frank, and I am a retired general pediatrician. I worked for many years running the pediatric practice at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Weill Cornell. And I've been working in subsequent years trying to help with the vaccination efforts in Westchester County. And I hope that you will be asking very interesting questions this evening, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you. And why don't we now go over to, and forgive me if we just recently got acquainted, so if I mispronounce your last name, but Dr. Anisha Mathur.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Anisha Mathur. I'm an adult physician. I do both infectious disease and adult critical care in the ICU over at Westchester Medical Center. I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to seeing what questions you have. I think one of the ways we can fight this virus is through education and just coming together as a community. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. And what about Dr. Carol Allen, who has quite a legacy, both in her profession and with this volunteer effort?
Good evening, everyone. And I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening to talk about the COVID-19 vaccine. I am Dr. Carol Allen. I am a retired physician. I'm a resident of Hartsdale, which is in Greenburgh. I practice at the Veterans Hospital in the Bronx and at the Hudson River Healthcare Community Clinic in Peekskill. And for those of you who may not know, internal medicine physicians take care of adults who have diseases of their hearts, their lungs, their kidneys, or other organs that are inside of the body. I met these other physicians on the call tonight through a program that was established in Greenburgh in January of this year that we called the Greenburgh COVID Vaccine Angels. The Angels were a group of nearly 300 people of all ages who volunteered to help get appointments for the senior citizens in Greenburgh who didn't have the technical skills or computer access to get appointments for themselves. Our group was successful in getting appointments for over 3,000 seniors in our community at a time when it was extremely difficult to get appointments. Now that the vaccine has become easily available, a segment of that original group, several who are here tonight, have been working to educate the community members who have not yet been vaccinated so that your concerns and fears can be addressed so that you will feel comfortable and be eager to get your vaccine. I hope that everyone in the audience will have their concerns addressed so that you can feel comfortable getting your vaccine so we can get back to living a normal life.
Okay, and sorry for my pause there. And thank you, Dr. Carol Allen. And next, Dr. Jansen da Silva.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Jansen da Silva. I'm a pediatric ICU doctor who actually has formerly worked at Westchester Medical Center as well, Dr. Mathur. I'm currently working in Florida in the pediatric ICU at Palms West Children's Hospital, where I'm also the medical director of pediatric inpatient services here.
Thank you. And next, Dr. Lawrence Neshwat. Oh, I think you just need to unmute, doctor. Okay, well.
There we are.
There you go.
Dr. Lawrence Neshwat, practicing physician, internal medicine and endocrinology in Yonkers, New York. I've been treating diabetics and patients with immune compromised conditions and have had patient questions and answers resolved in my practice and have been giving the COVID vaccines for the last several months through my office and through local programs with your help as well. And I've had good feedback from the patients who have received the vaccine and from people in my community. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to participate in this program.
Awesome, thank you so much. And we of course value your participation. And did we run the gamut of our esteemed panel? I believe we did. So at this point, I would say that the floor is open. We don't, we don't have a huge stream of people coming in just yet. So if there's someone who's here as an outside attendee who wants to ask anything of anyone here on this panel, you can at this point, I think, probably unmute and ask away.
My name is Sharon Walker. Good evening, everyone. Hi, Kenny. I just wanted to tell the doctors that came on the show, Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Carol, and Dr. Frank, I've got my vaccine. And now that I did get my vaccine, I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I'm a little concerned because I would like to know, I guess that's the one that they said is not the best choice. Do I need to go and get a booster shot?
As I have a recommendation. As far as the recommendation for booster injection, they've not yet been formulated in terms of the CDC guidelines. We are still waiting to hear from the CDC as to when and where that will happen, for which vaccine it will be recommended. However, again, it's waiting for the vaccine to have an effect on the immune system first, to see if that person is fully immunized from the dose they've gotten from that, whether it's the Moderna, the Pfizer, or the Jansen and Jansen vaccine. They all are good vaccines. They all will protect against the coronavirus. So we are thrilled that you've gotten the vaccine. I'm very hopeful that you will do very well. And I think waiting and listening to the guidelines by the medical professionals and not by the media and not by other propaganda is very important. I think you did very well. And I think waiting and hearing from them is the most important thing right now.
Thank you.
And using the precautions of the mask when you're in crowds and of course the personal protection equipment that we have in this country are awesome. So I think you did very well, and I congratulate you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. There's been some talk about giving boosters to people who have immune issues, who are immunocompromised. And I think if anyone has the booster first, it will probably be that group, although that also hasn't yet been completely determined, because they can't mount as good an offense when they're vaccinated. The response to the vaccine may not be as great in some individuals who are immune compromised. So having a booster may be helpful for them as the first group who get boosters. But it's still, as Dr. Neshawat said, hasn't been determined yet by the CDC. So we'll wait and see.
Okay.
Thank you. Unless anyone else had anything to add to that, I wanted to continue to open the floor for anyone else who might have a question.
Yes, I have a question. My name is Judith Beville. I'm a town clerk of the town of Greenberg, and I just want to thank my dear friend Carol Allen and one of our interns, Janice Lynn, for being part of this initiative. I'm vaccinated, and my family members are, and close friends are. My question is, oh boy, this is a tough one. If there have been no longitudinal studies, how do we know that the vaccine is safe? And what is that? What does it is safe? What is that based on?
Any takers?
I can try to tackle that. Like you said, I think that's always a tricky question, and it's an important one because we want to, am I not muted, right? Okay. Because we want to make sure that we're putting something into our bodies that we feel comfortable with, and then moving from there, advocating that it's good for us to get it. So just to kind of go back to not making it too sciencey, the technology about how we code DNA viruses or RNA viruses, and even how they're implemented into healing therapeutics like cancer drugs, that's actually been around since maybe the 1970s. So from that perspective, there is some longitudinal data of how those processes are studied in the lab, what potential adverse, meaning harmful effects can they have on the body. So I think that's why maybe at least in the community that is familiar with that, everybody felt really positive about saying that, oh, it's not harmful, there shouldn't be any things down the road, because that science was already established. I think what's new about this is that it was done at record time, so that was, I think, surprising to everybody and made people a little bit skeptical, and also the fact that it was introduced in a vaccine in this way for the first time. I could probably say with pretty good certainty that there's likely not going to be any long-term consequences from the vaccine. But we do know now, even with this short period of having the virus in our lives, that there are long-term consequences of having the illness, whether it's in the pediatric population, or I'm mainly seeing adults, but we are seeing some long-term effects from the virus itself. So when we look at risk and benefits of what's going to help us in the long run, I think doing what we can to protect ourselves, protecting our community, the virus is actually the one that we should be kind of targeting. Hopefully that answered your question. And if there's anything specific that I could elaborate on, please let me know.
Thank you. That was an excellent response. Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome.
And if I may add again to that a little bit, one of the things that I found very reassuring is that when the vaccine is given, it's for the 2 mRNA vaccines, which are the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. When mRNA goes into your cells, it does its job. It tells parts of the cells to make the protein, put it on the surface of the cell, so it can be recognized by the immune system. After it does that, within 72 hours, it degrades and disappears. So there isn't a lasting effect of that mRNA in your body. It does its job and it goes away. And I think that can be reassuring as well.
Thank you, doctor, for your response.
Dr. Frank, would you like to go into your slides?
I guess I could if I can manage to share my screen.
I think I can do
it
it for you.
Oh, okay. So the slide, there are a couple of, yeah, let's see.
You can get to the next one.
Can I get to the next one? There we go. So
is that the one that you'd like?
Yeah, here we go. So for the mRNA vaccines, oh, okay, there we go too. mRNA, is, people may or may not know, is a genetic material, and it tells cells how to make proteins. And it does that normally in your body. But the mRNA in the vaccine is a little bit different. It's going to instruct about one protein, and it enters into your body in a vaccine. It's injected into your arm, and it's wrapped in fat particles. So the fat particles protect the vaccine, and then after it's injected, that drops off, and the mRNA goes to a cell part called the ribosome, and it tells it to make the viral spike proteins. So it's not making COVID, it's just making one little piece of protein of COVID. And then those spike proteins are displayed on the surface of the cells. The cells then go to your lymph nodes, where there are a lot of immune cells that read the spike proteins and make what are called antibodies against them. And those antibodies persist. They stay in your body, and they get ready in case you're exposed to COVID, in case COVID virus gains entry. Those antibodies are there specific against the COVID virus to fight it. So there's a little bit of a, the next slide has a little visual, if I can get it.
That's the one that you want?
Here we go. And both in English and Spanish, a little bit of a graphic that shows, again, how the vaccine works. So the mRNA is there, the spike protein is created, and it tells your cells, the mRNA tells your cells to make that spike protein, it displays on the cell, it causes the production of antibodies, which is what all vaccines do. It makes your body make antibodies. So that in itself is not a new thing. Then the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is the viral vector vaccine, uses a virus. See, viruses are very, very good at getting into cells and telling cells what to do. So what scientists have done, and this technology has been around for a long time, and there are other vaccines that use this technology, it changes the adenovirus, so it no longer can make you sick. Adenovirus is a virus that gives you an infection that's like a cold. But that's taken away, so it won't make you sick, but what it does is tell your cells once it gets inside, again, to make the spike protein. And that, again, is displayed on the surface of the cells. It goes to the lymph nodes, tells cells there to make antibodies. They make the antibodies to protect you. You're ready again if you're exposed to COVID. So they end up working in similar ways.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm sorry, were there more?
So in terms of, we may as well, I think that this will be one of the questions. People ask this and have asked this a lot. when we go out and talk to people, what's in this vaccine? You know, what's in there? I want to know what I'm putting into my body, which is very, very important and quite reasonable. So in the mRNA vaccines, obviously there is this mRNA, and it stands for, if I didn't say it before, messenger RNA. And in your body, normally, messenger RNA is made from DNA, which is your genetic material, but it can be manufactured outside the body. So in this vaccine, the mRNA is sitting in fats. So there are different types of fats, depending on whether it's Pfizer or Moderna. It also is made, the vaccine has some salts in it that help to stabilize and balance the acidity. There are some sugars that help the molecules maintain their shape during freezing. And also a little bit of acetic acid and acid stabilizers in Moderna. So that's the little bit of a difference between Pfizer and Moderna, but they're very, very similar. So those are the mRNA vaccines. And is somebody else doing this for me, or am I doing it?
Is there another slide?
One more, just to show what the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is made of, the Jansen vaccine.
And while we're figuring out how to get to that slide, just what you're suggesting or what you're illustrating is to put to rest any concerns people have that somehow the vaccines are made up of weird nanotech and you know.
Right. Absolutely. It's not weird. The other thing is the mRNA cannot change your DNA. And that's an important point about the vaccine, something people have been scared of. When the mRNA goes into your cells after you have the vaccine, it cannot get into the part of the cell where the DNA is, and that's in the nucleus of the cell. It can't get in there. Plus, under normal circumstances, mRNA cannot change back into DNA. DNA creates mRNA, but mRNA cannot change itself into DNA. So it's not going to change your DNA.
If I'm correct, is mRNA new technology in the scientific world? Or?
So actually, it's a technology that's been around for more than 20 years. It had been trialed, other mRNA vaccines had been trialed, but they actually didn't work as well as this one did. So it had been trialed in 2003, especially for the SARS vaccine. So there was just a little bit of tweaking necessary to make it effective against COVID. So really, it wasn't so new. What was different about this vaccine production was that so much money was poured into this that the usual phases in the development of a vaccine happened very, very quickly and overlapped one another. You know, usually you have one phase and a second phase. So you determine whether a vaccine is safe, then you determine whether it's effective. But these different phases were compressed and overlapped so it could be done more quickly. But it did not affect the outcome of the trials. The other reason it could happen so quickly is the illness, the disease was so prevalent in the population and increasing that it did not take as long to have controls. So there were vaccinated people and there were people who weren't vaccinated who got COVID because it was so prevalent in the population. So that also sped up the development of the vaccine. Here's the last slide, which is the content of the Janssen vaccine. And as I mentioned before, it's a certain adenovirus, but it's not making you sick. It's not adenovirus. It expresses this spike protein when it goes into your body. So it also has acid, salt, sugars, and a little bit of ethanol. And that's the total content of the vaccine.
Thank you so much for that. Very helpful presentation, because as you said, that's kind of the first wave of questions we tend to get when we're doing outreach about the components of it. A lot of folks think that there isn't even transparency about the components. Of course, you could go to the websites for any of the manufacturers of the vaccines, and the ingredients will be listed regardless of what one thinks writ large about pharmaceuticals. So there is a question in the chat box as well, and if you have a question, you can feel free to put it in the chat box. You can, whatever works. You can raise your hand literally. You could, if you want to raise your hand with the Zoom function, whatever works. But there is a question that, and maybe Dr. De Silva, you can field this one, since you're currently so active in pediatric work and critical care. Is there an estimate of when the vaccine will be authorized for younger children? And maybe you can also just talk about what your experience has been like treating children throughout this pandemic who have been afflicted with COVID, and why you would encourage, if you would encourage, parents to get their children under 12 and over 12 vaccinated when eligible.
Sure. I think it's, so first question. So I think the projected approval for vaccines for 5 to 12-year-olds, which would be the next kind of age bracket, would be sometime midwinter. I heard earliest estimates, I heard perhaps October. But yeah, I'd like to see the data like everyone, like all parents and all pediatricians first, but I think it's got quite a good, the Pfizer and Moderna ones in particular have quite a good safety record going forward, in kids that have been that have gotten the vaccine already in age 12 to 17. So there were some isolated reports of myocarditis and pericarditis with the Pfizer vaccine that generally turned out to be mild and generally quite rare relative to the number of patients who tolerated the vaccines well. I do think the vaccines are like probably all of the panelists, the most important intervention we have against the virus now, and particularly against the Delta variant. I think in Florida, where I work, we're seeing a tremendous uptick in severe COVID pneumonias, and we're starting to see the multi-system inflammatory syndrome related to COVID already. And both of these populations of patients are definitely sicker than the first phase. Hard to say whether it's just because there are more children getting COVID infections, and because there are more kids, there are more sick kids, or whether the virus is actually more dangerous to kids. This variant, I'm not sure we know that yet. Hopefully in a month or two we will, after we get some more data. But the type of disease that adolescents are presenting with are very similar to adult severe COVID pneumonia. So whited out lungs, a lot of difficulty breathing, very low oxygen levels, propensity towards forming blood clots in vital organs, including brain and kidneys. And nearly all of the, I would say all of the adolescents that I've treated in the ICU have not been vaccinated. There have also been a number of other pediatric ages who've been infected. We've had neonates, 1-week-olds, 2-week-olds, a lot of people who are positive incidentally. So my concern is that I think early in the pandemic, the illness was really billed as a disease of the elderly and the sort of adult patients with comorbidities. And I think there was this kind of false perception that populations outside of that, those two groups will really be just fine with the virus. And what I'm seeing in the pediatric ICU tells a very different story. So yes, I'm an enthusiastic supporter of vaccines for ages above 12, and pending review of the data, I anticipate them to be safe for the next cohort, which would be age 5 to 12. And I think they're exceptionally important.
Thank you. And I think it's important that you made that distinction about the fact that, you are still waiting to see what the studies bear concerning the vaccines for 12 and under, because I've certainly, and we all have been doing this outreach, have been trying to impress upon individuals that there's a lot of concern and care taken into the, the preparation of making these available to the public. And I think people have some confusion about FDA emergency use versus full FDA authorization. So we could certainly go into that, and anyone is welcome to, but I just think it's important to bear in mind that no one who is in any kind of position of being a caretaker for someone who might have been transmitted or been transmitted with, had COVID transmitted to them, is looking to rush anything or be premature.
I just got a question, and so this person is asking if vaccinated people have the same amount of viral loads as unvaccinated people when they have breakthrough cases, and how do vaccinated parents protect their young children? So that's two separate questions. If anyone wants to tackle the first one.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I have seen some reports that the viral load carried by vaccinated patients, vaccinated people can be quite high, and vaccinated people can be infectious. Importantly, I think the vaccinated folk who are getting breakthrough infections, even with the Delta variant, are generally staying out of the hospital. It's really kind of less than 1%, I think. The last number I saw of these breakthrough infections results in severe disease and very little death. So I think it's important. A take-home point is that the vaccine is still protective against hospitalization and death, which are the two outcomes that we would most care about, even with the Delta variant. So I think that's really important. In terms of how parents can protect their children, I mean, it's difficult. I think parents, getting the vaccine, A, is most important, and B, I think observing the same precautions as we've been observing and are probably really sick of at this point, which is, masking, especially in public places, strict hand washing, observing socially distanced protocols, I think are all very important when parents are outside of the home to avoid getting in touch with this virus, which, as we know, is a lot more infectious and a lot more easily transmissible. So now more than ever is not the time to relax on all of the protocols that we've learned that have been ingrained and that we're all sick of, but they're more important now than ever.
And Dr. Allen, I think you had something to add to that as well.
I was going to comment that viral load is not something that we commonly do. It's not particularly useful in taking care of people when they become sick. That's something that we commonly measure in other diseases such as HIV/AIDS. All right, now, and one thing I'd like to point out is that hand washing, not being up in other people's faces, is important for public health in general. And while we say we're tired of wearing our masks, those other things that we've been doing to stay safe are things that we should always be doing. Hand washing, and not going out when you're sick so that you're not spreading your germs to other people.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And that really brings up the kind of thorny question of what children should be doing in schools. And certainly the hand washing, but I think until we've defeated the Delta variant and gotten more people vaccinated, the children really, to be fully protected, parents need to encourage their children to be wearing masks in schools, despite what some of the governors might be saying.
Enthusiastically agree, Dr. Frank.
I think as a physician and a person in the front line, I think anyone who's in the front line, whether it's a teacher, an employee of a restaurant, a person who's in charge of others, should be encouraged to get vaccinated so we can help relieve some of the spread of this variant. I think encouraging teachers to get the vaccination will also give their students the opportunity to be encouraged to get the vaccine. The parents will also feel reassured about their children going to school. That's why I believe that getting the vaccine to the people that are in charge of the others in our society is very important, and also helping them to feel comfortable being around them.
Yeah, and actually, I will just add, as a parent of an 8 and a 4-year-old who've been both masking now for a year and a half, and they hate it, and we hate they have to do it. And specifically my 4-year-old comes home every day with rashes around his mouth because he breaks out from the wet mask. I think he would even agree that he would rather come home a little moist and needing some cream on his face at the end of the day, but get to be in this environment of socialization and learning that exists in his daycare and his pre-K setting, than just be at home bored while mom and dad work because he gets to be unencumbered by the mask. I want to pause for a second to ask if anyone who's if anyone who's on this Zoom wants to kind of jump in and ask something. Okay. All right. If not, that's fine. I know, Janice, you're getting some questions in too. I just wanted to ask myself, there's one of the things I find myself having to answer for people often is the nature of the mutations. And I think people get very fatalistic if they feel like, well, this is just going to keep mutating and there's nothing we can do to kind of, we're just going to do this whack-a-mole thing. Is there anyone who can explain precisely how a virus like this mutates and the environment in which a new mutation can incubate and flourish?
So viruses mutate when they reproduce. So if we keep giving them places to reproduce, they'll keep mutating. The more that we limit the places to reproduce, the less they can mutate.
And if a virus, there are strains that have emerged in other parts of the world where there's a fewer percentage of people who've been vaccinated, which is certainly the case with Delta. If people are saying, well, if it's going to pop up in those areas and there's nothing we can do to prevent it from existing in the world, then how does it help us to continue to take all these mitigation efforts and get vaccinated if we don't exist in a vacuum here in the US? I mean, what would be your response to that?
I think there are a couple of different responses to that. One of them is we need to be helping to get everyone vaccinated in the world, right, and not just be thinking about our own country. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is that most mutations are not harmful. Some mutations are mutations like Delta. It's not a complete wipeout. There's some protection, obviously, as we know, there's protection against Delta. Whereas the Pfizer vaccine was 95% effective against the original variant that we were all faced with. It's a little less effective, but still very effective against the Delta. So some mutations, there'll still be partial protection against them.
Got it.
Could I restate what Dr. Frank said?
Whereas the Pfizer vaccine was 95% effective.
I'd like to repeat what Dr. Frank said.
Faced with.
He mentioned
it's a little less effective, but still very effective against the Delta.
Okay. She mentioned that the virus mutates when it reproduces. Viruses reproduce inside of their hosts. That is, they reproduce inside of our bodies. So the way to stop them from reproducing is to not let them reproduce in our bodies, which means if we have the antibodies from being vaccinated, they will not reproduce in our bodies, and therefore they don't get an opportunity to mutate. So I just wanted to make sure that was crystal clear.
Right. Thank you for that clarification.
I add to that just because from a learning perspective, we've seen similar theories to that actually happen in real life back in the early 1900s when there was the large Spanish influenza that affected 50 to 100 million people, or a very large estimate, and things were different back then, of course. But what we know from that is that there is a possibility, like you said, as more people are vaccinated, the virus itself has less of an opportunity to change and evolve. So I think that's one of the key points there that I just wanted to bring up.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also got another question, and I personally want to know because I think I'm going back to school this fall, and so I'm really curious about how safe is it for kids to have lunch in schools when everyone's taking off their masks to eat in a cafeteria? It's like an enclosed space, especially during the winter. Like you can't really eat outside, so.
A lot of schools are trying to restrict where people are eating so that they stay in what we call a cohort, so that they are not being exposed to a significant number of people. So that way, if one person were to be infected, they would not be spreading it to very many people, but only to a small group, and we would know who they were. It's important to have fresh air and to have air exchange. So even if you are inside, if there's a lot of air exchange going through the air filters, we talk about HEPA filters, high purification filters, those help to decrease the amount of virus that might be in the air somewhere. If you have an opportunity to eat outside instead of being inside in the cafeteria, of course, that would be the best way to go. But we understand that as the weather changes, you might have difficulty with that.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. I actually wanted to ask a question myself. Well, I have a couple of questions. You know what? First, Sharon, do you mind if I rope you into this? Is that no? Is that a no? Oh no. Okay, you're on mute is all.
No, yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay, Sharon. I hate to put you on the spot, but you're an individual who Vax at Westchester, did outreach with, and we talked for a long time, and you ultimately, for you and your son, decided to get the vaccine. But the reason I wanted to ask you something was because you are a religious person, very religious person, and have deep faith in God, and came to terms with your decision to get the vaccine. And you and I have talked at length about the fact that there are people who their faith in God and their belief in whatever God might have in store for them, be it the virus or anything else, has been a bit of a barrier between them and feeling comfortable getting the vaccine. So what would you say? What would you say to people of faith where that's been what has given them reservations?
Deep breaths. Okay, so that was my concern. I was adamant. You took me like a month to take my shot. If I didn't meet you, I still probably want to take the shot. I have a lot to say on this subject, but let me wrap it up real quick. So even like going to church and talking to different leaders, they are encouraging people that this shot is the mark of the beast. I used to think so as well. I went to God myself because it's a personal relationship. And the answer that I got is that I should be smart, have free will, because he gave us free will to think, and to go ahead and take the vaccine. I want to say that we have computer technology, we have technology, and this is a technology as well. So why will we be so scared to take this vaccine that is here to help us? You know what I mean? So I just prayed on it, Kenny. And I really think that the leaders of the church should give the congregation free will and let them go to God and have the answers themselves, and give them free will so they could think, because they're thinking people are dying. You know what I mean? And they are scared because of the church telling them not to take it. I'm telling you, I sit there. I had to walk out of church on Sunday because I didn't agree with that, because that's why I was so fearful to take the shot. And you're not supposed to live in fear when you're walking with God. So, Kenny, that's what I would say. I would say that we should think about the future generation. The kids need to go back to school because they have mental health issues, depression and everything. And I think it's the right thing for us to take the shot. We can't lean on our own understanding. And I think God gave us free will. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate it. And again, I want to, just Janice, I don't know if you've gotten any further questions or if anyone who's observing this has anything they want to ask. I don't want to, I don't want to constantly find myself jumping in and filling the void.
Can I make a comment, please? I'd like to thank you, Sister Walker, for your personal testimony. But I do want to reassure everyone that not all pastors are opposed to the vaccination. And we've had 3 major churches that I am familiar with here in Westchester who have been fully supportive of the efforts to get their actually 5 churches, fully supportive of getting their congregations immunized so that we can continue doing the outreach ministries that we have been doing, so that we can continue serving our communities and we can get back to worshiping and fellowshipping together like we like to do.
That is correct.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Allen, for that addendum.
I just wanted to ask Janice, did we answer your question completely? Because I think the question and the answer might be a little different for college students. So, and I know there might be some people about to go to college on this call. And for that, the decision is very much in your hands, who you sit down and eat with. And our best advice would be to be with friends who are vaccinated. And that would at least begin to solve some of that issue, but it's obviously not the whole issue because they can carry virus. It's possible and be asymptomatic. So then the other pieces that come into play are, having, as Carol talked about, well-ventilated areas and being outside as much as you can and limiting the time that you're spending indoors without masks.
Thank you. Another comment asked question.
I'd like to comment more about the college because I'm a professor and I can't wait to go back to school and see my student face to face. I'm a healthcare instructor and I'm worried about the students because we have to sit together. We have to go to the lab. Some of my students, they have the vaccine. Some of them, they're not even thinking about taking the vaccine. I'm worried about them, about myself as well. Because I had the vaccine, but also I can catch the other, like I had the Delta, in another word, because I have gathering and I go to the hospital and with patients as well, even with the mask. I was okay, but it was painful. So my advice to you as a student, keep the mask on. That's what the only thing I can say. Keep your mask on. I'm gonna keep my mask on as well.
Thank you. That's great advice.
Yeah, Janice, you have obviously a bird's eye perspective on what's on the what do you find has been first of all, do you know any friends of yours or any people your age whose parents have been reticent to have them get the vaccine?
I'm not completely sure about people my age and whether or not their parents are letting them get the vaccine, because that's a pretty private thing and a lot of people don't really like to share it, especially if they know they'll get criticism for it.
I can talk a little bit about this. I'm a rising high school senior at Scarsdale. And I would say the vast majority of my friends are vaccinated and they got it as soon as they could in April. But I do have, I think, 1 or 2 friends that their parents aren't vaccinated either and won't let them get vaccinated. And since most of us are 17, they can't get vaccinated unless their parents approve it. But I do think, and since I live in Scarsdale, and I think our overall vaccination rate is around 77%. I would say the majority of my school is vaccinated, and a lot of people are vocal about it too. People have been talking about it in like group chats and everything, and I think it kind of just depends on your level of comfortability. But I would say around people my age, I know most people are in my high school, but I think it gets lower as you get down into the middle school level, as there still are some worries about like 12 and 13-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. So how do we have, I guess the question is, how do we have these conversations? How are kids and teens supposed to talk about this amongst each other and feel like it's okay to talk about it amongst each other, and that it's not taboo to even speak of it outside of the home? And it's a thorny issue, and certainly I'm not the one who has the answer. I'm just saying things out loud that people might want to comment on.
From my students, what I see, they have no problem talking about it. Or their opinion. Some of them, no, I like to take it. The other one, no, I'll be fine. I don't want to, put it in my body. I don't know what's going to happen within 2 years. I hear things on TikTok. I hear things here and there on social media. And, some of them, it's not they shy or they don't want to talk about it, but it's the media, I believe, play a big, major thing between the youth, and because this is what they in contact with more than any of us.
Yeah, and I would say to anyone who's on this that, vaxupwestchester.org, we do as good a job as we can of presenting links to credible information that parses myth from fact, and just sort of just kind of isolates all of the misinformation and calls it out for what it is, and presents some of the better, more accurate information to the foreground. And certainly we do that, in our in-person outreaches as well. So anyone who's listening to this, reach out to us at vaxupwestchester@gmail.com, or go to vaxupwestchester.org, and we can come to your community and engage and do whatever we need to do. So I'm not trying to do a weird cheap plug here for Vax Up Westchester. But it is true. So was there any other questions that anyone specifically wanted to ask of our wonderful panel of medical experts here who might be listening in on this Zoom, or just sort of being a fly on the wall right now?
But I just mentioned that Vax Up Westchester is spelled VAXUP, Westchester, WESTCHESTER.
Thank you. And I believe someone just typed the URL into the chat box. And Westchester Youth Congress, by the way, it's just westchesteryouthcongress.com or .org?
.org. I'll type it into the chat.
Yeah, they are really doing incredible work. It's a student coalition of individuals like Janice, under the leadership of people like Lucas from across several districts in the county, and they are to be certainly applauded for everything they're doing. But if there's no other specific questions, and I'll pause in case there is.
I do have one question if we have time.
Yeah, throw it out there. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm asking about advice for students when we're walking in the halls and indoors, and we pass by each other. Sometimes people don't wear their masks correctly, or they're not vaccinated. So do you guys have any advice for how to try to stay as safe as possible there?
So I think the first line of defense is your own mask. And the second piece would be what's happening at your school. Are people taking it seriously? Is it being encouraged by the administration? Is this a new job for the hall monitors to have to enforce proper mask wearing? I think there are probably a lot of ways it can be approached, but probably starting the dialogue at the school is a good idea. So people have a chance to say how they're feeling about it and get all that out in the open. I don't know, it depends on the school, whether it would be a student council or, within each class homeroom or whatever, to have that dialogue, but I think it's important to have it and bring it up, bring it to the fore.
It's tricky because it's obviously difficult, when you're of a certain age you don't want to create the perception among students that you're someone who sort of, just kind of tattles on people for their behavior. But this is a situation where, it's totally appropriate to go to any kind of administrator and just say, this is what I'm observing and it's making me uncomfortable and feel unsafe. And maybe it's something you, as our leaders here, as the adults in this environment, can figure out a way to address, because it has to be, I agree, part of the conversation that's happening among school administrators and teachers and guidance counselors and so on.
I would definitely say, at least at my school, a lot of the teachers have been kind of vocal about it. And I know there was a teacher who was immunocompromised and they weren't allowed to teach from home. So whenever students were getting too close or they weren't wearing their mask properly, they're definitely very vocal about it. But I would say at the beginning, when we went fully in person, we had glass shields around us, plexiglass, and people were getting really uncomfortable with it. So they took it down actually, which didn't really make a lot of people feel better about the situations. But I think at my school, people were pretty vocal when they weren't comfortable around the other people, especially because not everyone was vaccinated. But definitely outside, everyone kind of started taking their masks off once and I think it was in June, we were allowed to take them off. And gym class, no one wore them anymore. And it still made me feel pretty uncomfortable because I knew a lot of people around me weren't vaccinated at that point. But in general, I think my advice would be that if you feel uncomfortable with the people around you not wearing their masks, I would just say something, even though it might be a little uncomfortable. You'll feel better about it in the long run. And I ate outside every day last year, and I think it made me feel a lot better being at school because the only time I was not wearing a mask would be outside.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I think Sharon had a question.
Yes. No, I just had a comment. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just have a comment because I've been seeing a disturbing trend lately where people just start sneezing because they didn't want to have you next to them, and also just coughing without covering up. So, we just always have to be careful. Even though I'm vaccinated, I try my best to wear my mask. It's very nervous,
Yep.
It's a nervous thing, even though I'm vaccinated.
Well, actually, if I can ask one final question, because I know we've been at this for an hour and people have been very generous with their time. So I do want to wrap up, but I to Sharon's point, I just gave that whole preamble and I forgot where I was going with all that. What should be people's sort of proportionate degree of panic in these sort of situations, we're worried about people sneezing or coughing near us versus where we were before the vaccines, just knowing that at least a certain percentage of the population in most areas has been vaccinated. How would any of you gauge what people's level of reflexive sort of anxiety should be compared to a year ago?
I think that it does not have to be at the same level as it was during last winter, because if we're vaccinated, and I think that the Provincetown natural experiment has been very helpful in showing us that a lot of people actually did get the virus. It was a lot of people in close quarters dancing and drinking. And people did get the virus, but they were not sick from the virus. A very, very small number were sick from the virus. So I think our level of concern does not have to be as great as it had been. But still, wanting to protect ourselves the best we can is the way to go.
Bed to urinate. So this is all unvaccinated. So I think, again, with the Delta, it's kind of a new landscape with Delta. So from my perspective, what I'm seeing down in Florida, I think unvaccinated people should be more fearful, and vaccinated people should have a little bit more should be a little bit more measured in their approach, and the panic can be subsided a little bit, but unvaccinated people should be very, very concerned.
Thank you for that. Sobering, but very, very necessary, warning warning slash, keeping things in perspective for those of us who are vaccinated. But unless anyone has anything else to add, just even in terms of a closing comment, I will give certainly a moment of pause for that. But otherwise, if Janice, if you agree, I think this has been very helpful and instructive, and I know it's going to now get out to even more people who are going to see it after the fact. So this has been so useful and terrific. And again, barring anyone having any other closing comment, I just want to thank everyone for.
Dr. Neshwat wants to say something.
Yes. I think it's a moral obligation on our leaders, whether they're religious leaders or educational professors. People in the community should come out and promote the vaccination of young children, the ages that are recommended for the vaccine, in order for them to get back to school and be able not to be fearful of being around others in their age. It's so important for people to feel less fearful of the vaccine, and coming from the leaders in our community, whether they're in our church, whether they're in our community as schools or wherever we meet. If we find there are proponents of the vaccine, more people will allow that to happen. Otherwise, we will never be able to bring this virus under submission. And we didn't kill the virus. We're preventing it from replicating in others. So the only way to come back to a normalcy in this world is to have more people get vaccinated. This is what people should understand, and that's what they should allow others to feel comfortable about taking the vaccine.
And it reminds me, it kind of comes back to what Sharon said about, and remember, you have your free will ultimately, and leaders should obviously set the right example from the top down. And then when it comes down to it, make your choice, but make an educated choice, and don't be swayed by anything but what feels like the real, true, honest information. What's going to really stand the best chance of keeping you and your loved ones in your community safe. So yeah, I guess unless anyone has anything else to add, thank you so much to everyone, of course, particularly Janice and the Westchester Youth Congress, and to all of our wonderful medical professionals who do so much selfless work around the clock. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to sharing the resulting video of this, far and wide, and hopefully reaching exponentially even more people. So thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming.
Sure. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good luck, students.
Thank you.